Hello, and welcome to Tales from a Graybeard. I'm your Graybeard Dave. Today, I'm going to be going over some slides that I wrote years ago when working for a local startup. Um, it was my way of explaining my engineering vision, and it still really holds true. I've honed it a little bit since then, but the fundamentals are still there. They come from the study of three topics in software development, which I call Agile, and Lean. So in this talk, we'll start off with an overview of Agile, and Lean. Then I'll go into a little bit of history. Then I'll discuss what Lean is in the light of mudas, which is the Japanese word for waste. We'll see these mudas applied to software in a theoretical way, and then I'll show some practical application of it. And then I'll have a summary, and at the end will be a series of links that are all clickable. I'll post these slides to the channel. So any books I list in here will be on the last slide, and you should be able to go and find the link to them. So starting off with some definitions of what these three terms mean. So the first, Agile, or Agile with a big A, I also think of it as business Agile or Agile by the book. This is what we do when we think about those practical tools and ceremonies, sprints and Scrum and retrospectives, as well as like Jira and other bug tracking tools. You hear a lot that Agile is Jira, and while that's not strictly true, that's where this comes from. So Agile with a big A means all of that stuff that the business focuses on, tangible things. Agile with a little a is also called software craftsmanship. Agile with a little a comes from the Agile Manifesto, and when a software developer talks about Agile, this is normally what they're talking about. It's a little confusing to continually disambiguate between Agile and Agile like I'm doing here. So instead, I'm going to be calling Agile with a little a software craftsmanship, or sometimes just craftsmanship. And this talks about how we get done, those sort of theoretical backgrounds of what our general approach to software development should be. And finally, there's Lean, which was called the Toyota method. I'll get into why in the history section, but it explains why we're doing this. Like, if you take these two approaches, how does that benefit the business? That's that last piece of this, or maybe really in my eyes, it's the first piece of this, and that's Lean. So a little bit of history. Software development process, we've been studying it since Fred Brooks published The Mythical Man Month. It was published in 1975 about his time building IBM's OS 360, a huge software engineering project for a big operating system in a big company. Since then, we've sort of been in a golden age for this. Software has become more and more important, so the topic of managing software has been talked about quite a bit. And we're kind of sort of figuring this all out right now. I think many people would disagree with me that we're figuring it out, but we're a lot better than we were. And I see this as mainly through the convergence of Agile, and Lean. I just want to say there's a lot of opinions how this can get done. This is how I do it. This is my theory. If it's not your way of doing it, if it contradicts your experiences, that's okay. Different people. Okay, Lean comes to us from Toyota in the 1970s. That's why it's called the Toyota method. It was originally made for Toyota, and then when it was generalized, it became known as Lean. So I don't know how many people out there are the same age that I am, but when I was growing up, there was this feeling that Japan was kicking America's butt at manufacturing. There were videos. There was this one where people are building cars, and they had to get so many cars done, but the Japanese system was so different, and they made everyone exercise in the morning. That was actually really based in fact. Japan was kicking our butt because they had adopted Lean, coming first out of Toyota and then spreading throughout Japanese manufacturing. So in the 1990s, the U.S. government started a program called the Manufacturing Extension Partnerships. This was sort of based in a model that was built up during the Dust Bowl, where the universities had a number of people who knew proper plants and irrigation and farming techniques you can use to combat the effects of the Dust Bowl. But the farmers didn't know that, and they were continuing to try to grow those crops that caused the Dust Bowl to begin with. And so the government got those university professors out into the field to explain these things to the farmers, who could also bring their practical experience. Very few university professors have ever actually plowed a field in those days. Similarly, the US partnership nowadays, the MEPs are between people who know lean and experts in the process, as well as people who know the nitty gritty of the manufacturing to help those manufacturing companies adopt lean. And it's been incredibly successful. US manufacturing is in a renaissance. You don't hear that a lot. We are manufacturing more than we ever have, and yet people talk about the failure of manufacturing. They're related. It's the failure of manufacturing employment. We're manufacturing more than we ever have, but we're employing far fewer people because we're manufacturing so much more efficiently. We want to bring that efficiency to software where we can never hire enough people, and because, in my eyes, it's simply a better system to work, a more enjoyable way of working. So, software craftsmanship, originally known as Agile, comes from 2001. There was a meeting in Snowbird, Utah, that had a bunch of software developers. Bunch of middle-aged guys with gray beards and round waistlines, and they all kind of look like me. Um, and They got together to talk about their experiences and talk about better ways of management. And they came out with this Agile manifesto. So there's a link to it here, as well as on the last slide. It's definitely worth a read. And it says stuff like individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So instead of focusing so much on our process and our tools, we're going to talk about interacting with each other. Now, that's very funny because in the second slide, third slide, if you count the title, I said that Agile with a big A focuses mostly on those processes and tools. Software craftsmanship says we find both of these valuable. We prefer the first over the second. And so if you look at business Agile, those processes and tools are there to support individuals and interactions. It's where the focus is. We still need those processes and tools, but we're focusing on individuals and interactions. Similarly, we still need comprehensive documentation, but working software should be our focus. We still need to negotiate contracts, but we should have a focus with customer collaboration. We can put collaboration into our contracts, etc. So everybody pause YouTube, go find the Agile Manifesto and read it. It's really interesting. Agile with a big A came out of software craftsmanship. We started seeing Agile Institutes in 2002. The concept of a Scrum Master was around the same time. One of my favorite Agile guys is Uncle Bob Martin. And I've got a link to a search that'll find his videos. He was one of the dudes at the Snowbird, Utah meeting. And he has some pointed opinions on Scrum Masters that they were never meant to exist. And that's because business Agile is different than software craftsmanship. We tend to think of Agile having always kind of been there, but it's really just been the last 20 years. And even then, I remember having to use a plugin for Jira to get it to do just some of the basic Agile stuff. That was, I think it was like 2013 when they finally integrated Grasshopper into the main suite. It took a while to catch up, and it took a little while to formalize some of these tools. It was just too theoretical to abstract. And so Business Agile came out as a way of making it easier to train people on, easier to agree on what our Agile processes are. So Lean. Lean focuses on bringing value to the business. Without value, we don't make money, we don't get paid, there's no purpose to the business. Without value, there's no value to doing it. Thus, all activities are judged on what kind of value they bring. Now, sometimes that's money, but it's not always money. Value can be viewed in a variety of different things. Viewing it simply as money violates Goodhart's law. Money is a measure, it's not the goal. So Goodhart's law, when the measure becomes the goal, the measure ceases to be valuable. So we should be focusing on what value is, but value is too fuzzy. So Lean focuses us on eliminating waste. You eliminate waste and the business does better. We put out more products, we stock inventory and track inventory better. And everything that we need to do as a business, we do better if we focus on eliminating the waste in everything we do. Oh, and in Japanese, the word waste is muda. So you'll see me referring to mudas a lot because Lean uses the term muda because it comes out of Japan. So one of Lean's wastes or mudas is inventory. And this is really counterintuitive. So it's the one that I'd love to use as an example. Before Lean, people thought of inventory as an asset. Like you would say, oh, okay, I used to work for Google. Google makes cell phones. We've got $100 million worth of pixels sitting there in warehouses. So that's worth $100 million to us, right? That's an asset. And if you look at our quarterly or their quarterly earnings reports, you'll see our inventory reflected in the assets. Their inventory reflected in the asset section. But Lean says that inventory is not an asset, it's a waste. You have to buy warehousing space. You need software to track the warehousing. The phones will get old. Eventually, Google's going to put out a Pixel 8, a Pixel 9, and the Pixel 7 will be worth less and less as time goes on. So if you can make just what you need to sell, you will have a more efficient business. You will get rid of a lot of waste. So that's an example of a waste. So the Muda's Lean 7 types of waste are transport, inventory, motion, waiting, overprocessing, overproduction, and defects or rework. These map to software, transport maps to context switching, inventory maps to unfinished work, motion to unnecessary handoffs. We'll go not over all of these, but as examples, I would encourage anybody to search for Lean software if you want more of this. If you want something really, really detailed, the Poppendieck book, written by Mary Poppendieck, is Lean software, it's called. It's a very detailed, wonderful overview of how you apply all of this to software. Far more detail than I'm ever going to get into or, frankly, ever use, but really fascinating book. Link is on the last page. So we're just going to dive into a few. Let's start with a really easy one. Transport or context switching. So context switching is, engineers hate context switching. You force an engineer to switch from one thing to the next, you break the flow. And an engineer's flow is the most wonderful state. It's the engineer is the happiest then because it's empowering. It feels useful. It feels the flow feels wonderful. It's great for the business. The engineer gets a ton of work done. It's good for everybody. So context switching ruins flow, ruins concentration. So obviously, bad one. Overproduction is less intuitive. Overproduction maps to unnecessary features. So a lot of people will say, yeah, I know we're going to need this in the future, so I'm going to build it now. This is the Agni principle. You ain't going to need it. And that leads to now you've got a bunch of code that needs to be maintained that you're not using yet, and you may, in fact, never need it. You think you will, but it's hard to predict the future. Or even worse, and I've seen this happen a lot, someone builds that feature and then people use it because it's there. But it was built without a direct need, without the focus on testing, without being burned into production. But it feels like it has because it had been in production, it just hasn't been used, and now people are using it, and then we find bugs, subtle bugs later on. So, well, any bugs we find, now it's been a long time between when you built it and when you find the bugs, and that makes fixing bugs harder. So overproduction is a waste. If you don't need a feature now, it's not necessary for shipping the code, it's not some tech debt that's getting in the way, then don't work on it. It's overproduction. It's unnecessary features. And so now we can sort of map all the way from Lean through craftsmanship into business Agile. So context switching and unfinished work on merged feature branches. In craftsmanship, we're talking individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So it's better if a engineer can run their own process, can finish the work they're doing, rather than focusing on what the processes and tools are. You can allow them to do their work. And how we do this is we give them a clean backlog and an easy Agile board. So we've got these tools to say, hey, engineer, here's what you need to do. You can pick up the tasks as you need to get them done. But we want you, once you start in a context, we want you to follow that context all the way through. And so an engineer wants to follow that context all the way through. So we're going to give a clean backlog, an easy Agile board. Jira is really nice for this, to give that person the ability to follow that all the way through. And you can go through all the rest of these. Bugs and tech debt, for instance, in craftsmanship, we value responding to change over following a plan. Bugs and tech debt, you should be able to just go and fix these. And in Agile, we have iterative development and stakeholders and all this sort of stuff. So, what does this mean in practice? So, when you're talking to me, I tend to think in terms of lean more than Agile or craftsmanship. If you're going to come to me and say, we need unit tests, and I say, well, why do you need unit tests? And you say, well, unit tests are something that engineers are supposed to do. It's good code. I don't really care. But if you say, well, unit tests help us track bugs better, so we have fewer bugs and less tech debt in the future. Unit tests allow us to test while we're in the flow. And so it gives us that ability to follow the process through as we need to follow it. It gives us our individual control over our development instead of the unnecessary handoff of us building it, then giving it to QA, and then it comes back as interruptive. That means now QA is in charge of my personal software development. I'd like to take more of that back for myself. And, you go through all the various different, make your arguments according to lean. Our process as we build it, you can find another video where I talk about my minimum Agile framework. That's the minimum framework that I start with. But as we build that process or shrink that process, I want to focus on the elimination of waste. So we say, we want to change the time of our stand-ups. Why? Because it's less interruptive. Interruptions are a waste. And context switching is a waste. I also think it's good for everyone's career to know this stuff. When you start your next job, when you're working within this job, when you want to advance, knowing how to explain what we're doing to the business, how to focus on what the business needs, and how to apply that to software engineering process, that's the sort of thing that makes good leaders. And so if you want to advance, particularly through management, but even through like architecture, knowing this stuff is really valuable. So, as I said, I would have a slide with some good books. Some of these I didn't mention, so I'm going to go over them really quickly. A book on lean. I found this Lean Farm book to be really, really interesting and very valuable because we all know how to build, how to grow stuff, how to build a farm, at least in theory. Not that I could actually run a farm, but I understand the terms they're using. I find it much more understandable than manufacturing, which has a lot of processes that just the general hoi polloi, me, for instance, don't know. This one I found very easy to understand the fundamentals of lean. So if you want an easy introduction, an interesting introduction, this one's great. I said I'd give the link to Uncle Bob Martin. There's the Pop and Dick book, Out of Crisis by Deming. W. Edwards Deming is one of those lean gurus. He's a management guy that was involved in building the Toyota method in the early days and writes a lot about it as an evangelist. One of my favorite books. Out of Crisis. I keep it here because I refer to it a lot. That's what I've linked here. Link the Agile Manifesto, the principles behind Agile. Lean Startup by Eric Ries talks a lot about this. I didn't particularly like this book, but other people do like it. And this is the Mythical Man Month by Brooks. Again, if you're going to read one book on management, Mythical Man Month is it. So to summarize, we've got three things: Agile, software craftsmanship, and Lean that work together. Lean describes the waste that we're trying to get rid of, which is how you describe the stuff to business. Why are you doing this? Because it reduced this waste. Software craftsmanship says how we as software developers want to approach software development. And a lot of that is focused on the stuff we want to stop doing, the wastes. And finally, Business Agile, Agile with the big A, is focused on practical application of how do we do that. So we want to eliminate this waste. This is generally our approach to doing it. Okay, these are the tools and ceremonies we're going to use. If you combine those, you see them in the right light, you can make a very good software engineering process with highly effective teams. And that's what I do. It's not magic. It's the result of decades of software development, theory, and application. literally almost half a century, 48 years since the Brooks book came out. So thank you very much for listening to this. I hope this was useful. Again, you can find these slides in the comments in my channel. And I really appreciate you tuning in.